Everybody, Dr. Shawn Talbott. Hey, we're having class outside today for a very good reason, because we're going to talk about stress, but we're going to talk about stress in a little bit different context than how I usually talk about it. Usually, when I'm talking about stress, I'm talking about chronic stress and how chronic stress can be so detrimental. We're going to talk about the good side of stress, and we're going to talk about what I sometimes call the whelmed zone. Nowadays, stress is everywhere around us, right? We're being bombarded 24/7 with input. We're not getting enough sleep. We're probably not eating right, which is a very unique kind of stress on the body and the mind and the microbiome and everything in between. But stress can actually be a good thing if it's pulsed in the right way. If you have the stress and then you have a recovery, and then you have stress and you have a recovery. So we're going to talk about that. So this whelmed zone is this sweet spot between being underwhelmed and being bored and being overwhelmed, like so many people are these days, and then really being kind of burned out, right? The whelmed zone, what sometimes I call the Goldilocks zone, is where excellence lives. That's where we are the best versions of ourselves. That's where physical performance excels. That's where mental performance excels. That's where the burst of creativity comes. That's when you are doing your best work, when you're in that zone, so to speak. And you can call it the whelm zone. You can call it the Goldilocks zone. You can call it the sweet spot. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But it really is. If you look at the science of stress, Goldilocks had it right, right? It's not, too hot, too cold, just right, too soft, too hard, just right. It's that just right. And getting into that just right zone is really elusive for a lot of people, I think, because, especially high performers, especially hard chargers, whether you're an elite athlete, or you're an executive, or you're a stay-at-home mom, right? Any of those are athletes in their own certain way. A lot of times we fall into the trap of thinking that the way to better performance in whatever it is that we're trying to do is to work harder, right? You just push more. You sleep less. You cut a corner for yourself, and you put it into your job, or into your sport, or into your family, and that's gonna yield the best results. And unfortunately, it sometimes yields the worst results, because you're not able to recover. So if we're talking about stress, the good stress. Let's talk about bad stress first. When we talk about stress that's bad, it's a word that you've heard before. It's distress. So distress is bad stress. That's the chronic stress that causes our immune system to break down and causes us to have too much cortisol, which leads to all the problems you've heard me talk about many times. Eustress, EU stress, is the good kind of stress. That's the kind of stress where you get a little bit of the cortisol, a little bit of the adrenaline, a little bit of the tissue breakdown, let's say, if we're talking about sports. But then we have a recovery period where our body can come back stronger, our mind can come back stronger, our stress hormones dissipate, our immune system comes back in a primed state to help us function better. Our neurons are actually stronger, so everything works the way we want it to work if we have that stress and recovery and stress and recovery. And that's what I mean by this whelm zone. If you don't get enough of the stress, then you're going to be bored, you're going to be disengaged, you're going to be sluggish in your thinking and in your physicality. If you get too much of it, your biology goes haywire, right? You get into this crash and burn sort of a cycle. You get brain fog, you get immune system suppression, you get anxiety, you get depression, you just feel kind of blah all the time. So it really is important, whether you are an athlete, where I spent my first whole part of my career as a sports nutritionist, trying to get athletes and coaches to understand this curve between not enough stimulus, not enough stress, and too much stimulus, where you're getting overwhelmed and burned out and overtrained in the case of athletes. I'm actually in a situation like that right now. I'm in a taper week where I've been training really, really hard, putting a lot of physical stress on my body. This week is all about rest. If I do any workouts, they're really, really light workouts. I've been on my taper now for 3 days, and I'm starting to get a little antsy. But it's good for my mind. It's good for my body. It's good for my immune system. It's good for all the things. So I'm going to have better mental and physical performance this weekend in the gravel triathlon that I'm doing, because I'm really focusing on the recovery side of that stress curve right now, so that my body and everything is able to come back come back and reach up to the highest levels of my performance. If I didn't do the training, then I wouldn't have progress and I'd be stagnant. If I did too much training, I'd get into overtraining syndrome and I'd get fatigued and I'd get stale and I might get injured. I might get an illness. I might come down with a cold or a flu or something like that. So being in that whelm zone is all about pairing that intensity with recovery. And so, we know this from athletes, and it makes so much sense with athletes, but we forget that it applies whether your stress is being in the office, and you're an office worker, or you're someone who's working at home and you're a creative person. It's the same exact principle when you're talking about your family. You might be stay-at-home mom, you might be a homeschooler, you might be you might have that piece of it, right? So it can be work, it can be family, it can be sports, it can be all of that kind of stuff. You have to sort of thread that needle between too little stimulation versus too much stimulation, and make sure that you're balancing those aspects of recovery. So that all sounds really easy to do, right? It's very logical to do, and a lot of times people will think of it only from the perspective of like shifting their mindset, right? Where they think that, okay, let's think about stress, and there's a distress and there's a eustress, and we have to balance it, and it's sort of like this intellectual exercise, and that's great. That's probably the first step, is to understand that there's that balance point. But what do you actually do? What are the whelmed tools that you can do in a practical nature? So the first one I already mentioned, it's pulsing your stress. Have a period of stress, have a period of recovery. One of the best ways to do that is to prioritize your sleep. I talk about sleep all the time as being sort of the underappreciated recovery tool in all the different ways: mental recovery, immune system recovery, physical recovery and repair. If we're not getting optimal sleep, that is the backbone of our resilience, mentally and physically. And you really, really have to prioritize it. So that might mean setting an alarm, not to wake up in the morning, but setting an alarm to go to bed at night. So you go to bed at 10 o'clock instead of 11 o'clock. If that's your issue, that you end up staying up later, and then you have to get up at the right time to go off to work or whatever you have to do. So you can't sort of stretch it on that end. So stretch it on the front end. Make sure that you're doing the right things to prioritize your sleep. Make sure you have a good wind down routine. Make sure you take the right foods beforehand. Make sure, if you need to, supplement with things like corn grass before you go to bed, so you can naturally produce melatonin overnight. I write about all these things on my blog. In fact, I just put up a blog about this whelmed zone. So if you want to check out doctalbot.com and just head to the blog area, there's all kinds of information about this. Another way to do it is think about your physicality, your physical movement, your exercise, if you will, as a planned stress that helps your body to adapt. So many people, even today, think of exercise as something they do to get stronger or to lose weight. I think of it, and those are fine, but I like to think of exercise as a way to train your mind and to train your stress response system, what we call the HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, to be able to withstand stress. There's a whole body of scientific literature that shows that people who are more physically active, don't have to be athletes, but people who are more physically active, moving their bodies on a regular basis, are more resilient mentally and physically. Their immune systems are stronger, their muscles are stronger, their circulatory system and their nervous system are stronger. They're able to navigate sticky situations more efficiently. So exercise isn't just sort of a physical thing. It really is a kind of a whole body mind kind of a thing, and that planned stress of regular physical activity can really train your body to adapt and to be resilient in the face of stress. And then the last thing that I'll mention is nourishing your gut brain axis, right? Anything that you deliver, anything you eat, you deliver to your gut, and those nutrients are going to permeate out as signals across your gut brain axis, and they will signal more stress if you're eating bacon cheeseburgers all the time, or they'll signal less stress if you're eating a lot of phytonutrients that come from fruits and vegetables and whole grains and that kind of stuff. So we can do that. We can, focus our diets on, Mediterranean style diets, what I call the mental fitness diet, and which I unpack in my book, the mental fitness or mental fitness. I have a mental fitness diet in my book called Mental Fitness. I write about a lot of this on the blog as well. But you can also supplement strategically. You can use things like the corn grass that I mentioned before to help with sleep quality. You can use something like theanine to help get you out of these agitated brain waves called beta waves, which are, you have beta waves when you're working and you're focused and you're on a task, but you don't want to have those waves all the time because it makes you feel just kind of agitated and irritated if you have those waves all the time. Theanine can shift you away from beta waves and into alpha waves where you're in this state of relaxed alertness, what an athlete would call the zone. So you can perform at your highest level mentally. So theanine is a good way to go. There's an herb that I really like that I hardly see anywhere in the United States anymore, called Rafuma. It comes from traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, and traditional Japanese medicine, what we call Campo. And in those cultures, Rafuma is used for sleep quality, as an anti-anxiety effect. It has an anti-depression effect. It really can sort of help you get into the zone. And I like to use it as a resilience modifier. You can take it in the moment when you're stressed out, and it helps you sort of come into that resilient zone, the whelmed zone. Or you can use it on a regular basis. I take it every single day to help me just to be able to just sort of deal with whatever comes down the pike, because what's going to hit the fan at some point on most days. And when that happens, you're able to navigate that situation and solve problems and come up with good strategies and all that kind of stuff. So Rafuma, Rafuma, you can find it around if you start looking for it. In fact, I'm going to be launching a product later on this year that has Rafuma in it. And then the last thing I would say is strategically using probiotics. There are specific strains of probiotic bacteria that can help make more GABA to help you relax. There are strains of probiotic bacteria that can lessen your cortisol load. There are strains that can help to make, anti-inflammatory cytokines versus inflammatory cytokines, which can lead you to feel more stressed out and interfere with your body's ability to recover and things like that. So there's things that we can do generally. Pulsing our stress, getting good sleep quality, moving our bodies, getting ourselves in the mindset of good stress versus bad stress, eustress versus distress. And then there's some targeted things that we can do in terms of moving our bodies as planned stress to help us, train our system. Targeted dietary interventions like the mental fitness diet, and then targeted supplements to help us with those different pieces. And the thing about supplements too is that you can create a little stack, that some of the supplements might work early, like a theanine works in about 30 minutes. Something like Rafuma might work over the time course of a couple hours to a couple of days. You might look at some of the probiotic strains that can help with mental wellness signaling across the gut-brain axis. Those might take weeks to months. So if you stacked those appropriately, you could get something that works right now, and something that works medium term, and something that works long term, so that you're able to just ride those waves of eustress and distress and keep yourself in that whelmed zone. Okay. Thanks a lot for watching, you guys.